Okay, so the palace at Versailles. Let's do a little bit of historical background, which actually doesn't have a ton to do with Versailles, but I just never told you about it, so let's go ahead and start. So, during the 17th century, all of Europe got pretty messed up, in large part because of the 30 Years' War, in which the Habsburgs, who, as we know, were in charge of both Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, um, right? Because like after Charles V abdicated and he split the empire between his uncle got the Holy Roman Empire and his son got Spain, and they basically go to war with everyone else in Europe, like literally everyone else, like all the Protestant German states, the Dutch, the English, the French, the Swedish, Norway, the Ottomans get involved, the Russian czars get involved, like everyone is fighting. And this lasts until 1648. There's a 40% reduction in the population of what is now Germany, in part because of the war and the fighting, but also because of famine and disease that results from the war. So things are really bad. Um, in France, there's all this stuff going on where Louis XIII, if we remember, his mother was Marie de Medici, and we talked about her when we looked at Rubens's portrait of Marie de Medici. And we know that France was all messed up because she and her son were beefing over power, and that's part of the reason why she has Rubens paint that bonkers series of portraits of her. In any case, and then she ends up being exiled. Well, after Louis the 13th dies, the 5-year-old Louis the 14th comes of age, and then we start to see some stability in France. All right, after this sort of really messed up time of people fighting with everyone. So he is Louis the 14th is of course you remember him from Modern World or AP World, our quintessential absolute monarch, right? In which, like, what do we mean by absolute monarchy? Where it's like the king is the state. Like those two things are fundamentally intertwined. They are the same thing. And as we know, Louis the 14th. Oops. Why? Okay, sorry. Um, Louis the 14th, um, he calls himself the Sun King. We're going to see a lot of, therefore, consonants with Apulu, excuse me, I'm not Etruscan, Apollo. And, during this time period, the arts come under royal control. So if we have absolute monarchy, of course, that extends to art as well, in France. So this is the founding of the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture, happens in 1648. And we're going to talk more about the Royal Academy, because basically what the Royal Academy is going to do is going to determine what kind of art is good art based on what best serves the purposes of the king. We'll talk a little bit more about something you read briefly about the debate between the Poussinistes and the Rubenists, but don't worry about that too much for now. In any case, people who were part of the Royal Academy, would get the royal commissions to make art. So, this is, and the Academy is going to become incredibly important in terms of French art throughout the 1800s, and then in the 1900s we're going to start to see our modern artists break away from the Academy system. So this is the establishment of something that we're later going to see get destroyed. In any case, let's talk about Versailles specifically. So Versailles. Louis moves his court out to Versailles in 1682. Louis the 13th had had a small chateau in Versailles, but Louis the XIV actually moves the palace and the royal court, everything outside of Paris into Versailles. And it's a total power move, right? Because what ends up happening is all the nobles have to come out to him and live on his terms and come to court and present themselves. So what you end up having here in terms of function of Versailles, we have 5,000 aristocrats who are living in this palace. And if we have 5,000 aristocrats who can't do anything for themselves, which means we have 14,000 military servicemen and servants who also live in the palace, and then extending out into this town all the way around Versailles, 30,000 residents, most of whom are royal employees. So this is, this incredibly complex, basically city that is a testament to absolute monarchy and like sort of the architecture of absolute monarchy. And what does the architecture look like? Well, so the Royal Academy of Architecture is founded in 1671, and the French Royal Academy of Architecture is really interested in classical ideals of architecture, sort of mathematical perfection and balance. But this is also the 1700s, so we're going to have this like weird melding of sort of this surface interest in classicism and like sort of our classical ideals, but then it's Baroque, so it's going to look like just like a bunch of gold got vomited all over everything. So let's take a look at what we're looking at in terms of that. So our architects here are going to be, as you see here, Louis Leval and Jules Hardouin-Massat. Leval is the one who first does the architecture, and then I think after he dies, Hardouin-Massat like takes over. So the painting largely up here, like in the vaults in the Hall of Mirrors, is Charles Lebrun, and then the gardens are going to be André Lenotte. So let's kind of move through. We'll start with we talked about this town. You have this. Look at the little close-up of the town. You can sort of see there's an interesting thing where these kind of avenues sort of radiate out and all point us into the palace itself, right? And here this is a modern picture. You can see all the tour buses parked outside. All right, let's take a closer look. Here's the plan. All right, so this is where you would have seen the tour buses in that previous picture. You can see the layout of the court. As you can tell, there's many, many rooms, lots of places for our 5,000 aristocrats and our Sun King to hang out. And here you can also see, so here's the palace, and you can see how these gardens just extend out. This central canal, I think, is about almost like a mile long. It's a really, really huge space, huge palace that we're talking about here. So let's take a look first at the facade of the palace itself. Now this facade here, oops, I don't know why that keeps on popping up. Okay, let's just do it here. It's going to be what is back here. Okay, so let's take a look at the facade. So here we can see, as we said, right, the classical influence. We've got this kind of rusticated first floor here. This brick is a little bit more rustic and roughly hewn, or the stone, excuse me, not the brick, it's not brick, it's stone. And then we've got these, arched windows on the second or the main floor with these colonnaded porches, all nice Ionic columns. We've got some Ionic pilasters between our arched windows, and then we've got this attic story that also has some Ionic pilasters as well. And all of this gives us this really, this balance between the horizontal and the vertical. We can really see the classical influence here on the outside. Now, but then when we get to this is the courtyard here, and just to show you where exactly the courtyard would be. So this is right in here. We can see where, oh yeah, classical, but also Baroque, right? In terms of just look at this ornamentation that we have over here. Just scrolls and gold and contrasts in different kinds of marble, lots of different colors. So there's all of our Baroque drama that we have come to expect. And nowhere do we see Baroque drama more than here in the Hall of Mirrors. Now, the Hall of Mirrors is 240 feet long by 47 feet wide. It looks even bigger than that because on one wall we've got mirrors, and on the other wall we've got windows. So, right, the reflections of the light make this room look even bigger than what it is. These mirrors are going to give us, on the one hand, we've got, you remember the classical, we've got some more pilasters, far more ornate capitals though. And the balance and the symmetry between the arched mirrors and the arched windows. But we've got that symmetry, but then we've got the splendor of the Baroque, right? I mean, mirrors and windows and glass windows are super, super expensive in the 17th century. So this is just pure ostentation, right? And then you can also imagine what this would have looked like at night with the candles lit here and the light reflecting off of all of this crystal and the gold and the mirrors and everybody, all the nobles of the court and the king parading around in their, high heels and silk dresses and, all of that stuff. So there you have this. Now let's take a closer look up at the vault. So the vault was painted by Le Brun. Le Brun studied in Italy, but he was more of a he's classically influenced, but he's a little bit more restrained than what we see in Italian Baroque, right? I mean, if we can call this restrained, but it is, if you compare it to like Gaudi or something like that in Italy, in Rome, then this is a little bit more restrained than the Baroque ceilings we see in Italy. So we've got this kind of classically influenced vaulted ceiling, but then there's also gold all over it, right? So it's classical as well as Baroque. Now let's take a last look at the gardens. So the gardens, the designer is Lenotte. He uses these, and actually, let's go back to this image here so we can take a look at the plan of the gardens. He uses these broad, straight avenues, right, like these things, that are going to radiate out of circles, all of these circles here, right? So this kind of way of putting a garden together is incredibly influential in landscape architecture to this day. And this is sort of the classic French garden. The eye follows these lines, and then what ends up happening is this space looks even bigger than it is. So we have this very neatly landscaped, this very symmetrical, geometric, harmonious form, right? Again, the classical. But what's Baroque about it is how freaking huge it is. I mean, just look how large these gardens are. When we get into looking at now I'm going to give you a little close-up of the actual gardens. So these are some gardens that are closer to the palace, and they're even more, the garden beds that are closest to the palace are the most formal, the most sort of like perfect and symmetrical, and they're called embroidered parterre because they've got these really sculpted hedges, and then here in this image you don't see it as well, but like very colorful planted flower beds and things like that. I mean, we have also got reflecting this place is just lousy with water, reflecting pools, 1,400 fountains, some which would only come on when the king would walk by them. In terms of what was planted here, they would have summer plants shipped in from the south of France, so there would be flowers blooming all year long. Right? So, I mean, it's like no wonder that all of these guys are going to get their heads chopped off, right? Like pretty soon when you look at this. Anyway, okay, so that's Versailles. That's all I have to say about it. All right, talk to you later.